Hello and welcome, everybody. It is a real privilege for me to have the opportunity to have a conversation with Dr. Guy Hatchard. Now, he'll be speaking at the Safe and Effective ROADSHOW, which begins in Dunedin on the 9th of November, then Queenstown, Nelson, and Wellington. Now, this is a conference you really do not want to miss. It's a quest for common sense, justice, compassion, and the truth. You could call it a solution-based conference with the ultimate goal of healing from what's been happening to New Zealanders over the last few years when it comes to injuries, and of course, ensuring that this type of thing doesn't get repeated. Dr. Guy, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to have a chat with me. Now, when you were invited to this conference, and you looked at the title, and it was called the Safe and Effective Roadshow, is there another side to the story? The Safe and Effective Roadshow. Is there another side to the story? Now, what went through your mind when you read that title, and does it resonate with you at all?
Absolutely. I think the situation we're faced with is that we have a pandemic of an unusual virus, which the American government and authorities like the New York Times have investigated and found it came out of a lab. And then we have a vaccine, which is a completely novel vaccine, which crosses the cell membrane and alters the way that cells function, getting into the wheelhouse of life. And that came out of a lab. And whichever side of that argument you're on, whether the health crisis that we're in here in New Zealand is due to the COVID or whether it's due to the vaccine, it is due to genetic engineering in laboratories. And that's something we have to have a discussion about. I was just talking to my neighbor or to a couple of neighbors, one whose nephew had been admitted to hospital with chest pains, and the other whose wife works in the health system. And there is this generalized concern that we took a wrong turn and ended up in the wrong part of town. And to get out of that, we have to have conversations, and they have to be up-to-date conversations because the science has moved on. And that's what we focus on at the Hatchard Report, is the published science. We reference our releases, which go out 2 or 3 times a week, to the latest published science, which has raised concerns about health issues surrounding the vaccine, surrounding COVID. You know, both the vaccine and COVID produce spike proteins, and spike proteins are now known as cardiotoxins. And we have to work out how we're going to get out of this, how we're going to exit, what is our exit strategy. And that's what the Safe and Effective Roadshow is about, because ultimately everybody's health is their own responsibility. We have to inform ourselves, we have to take sensible decisions that are going to ensure that our health continues. So these are the kind of issues that will be discussed at the Roadshow, and I think it's about time that we had these discussions.
There's a lot of new words which have become popular, like misinformation and even fact checkers. It seems that even when authorized, authentic data comes out and it goes onto social media, they take it down. A fact checker's taken it down, but in a way, aren't you a fact checker in some way, Dr. Guy? In a different way, of course.
I think if you want to check the facts, you've got to go to the latest published research, which goes through peer review processes and appears in top journals. And you've got to go to the official figures, the latest figures. And, there are a lot of concerns here and a lot of hidden data. We haven't had any published data on cancer statistics since 2019. And yet there are very serious discussions going on in the published literature about the effect of gene editing on our capacity to fight off cancer. We also have a crisis of health among teens and young people. And official information releases have shown that thousands, actually tens of thousands, of New Zealanders under 40 are reporting to emergency departments each year with chest pains. Why is that? these have to be open discussions rather than things that you have to make official requests to government. And when we talk about fact checkers, they're largely driven by AI. And the thing about AI is it lives in the past. It it derives its information very often from things that happened or things that people thought years ago. And those things, one of the things you notice about computers, I'm sure, is those things sort of stick around in a computer, whereas a human being can change its mind. A computer is left with methods that mean it sort of accumulates data and averages it. It doesn't have that nimble intellect that the human has. So
well, I like how you said we're all responsible for our own health. But when you have a government saying science is settled, that they are the single source of truth, and that it's safe and effective, that kind of they're trying to take that responsibility away from us, aren't they?
Why is the question I have. You can't take that responsibility away from us because it is our own responsibility, always has been and always will be. You can't just fob your health off on someone else. You have to take measures that are going to protect your health. A lot of people want to point the blame here, but my message is that we have to evolve out of the pandemic. 80% of the population or more, but maybe even 90% of the population received COVID vaccines. And we've still got COVID 5 years later flying around. And somehow or other, as a united whole nation, we have to work out how to evolve out of that, how to take the steps together to get on to the next stage of life. And so, our social life, our life as a nation, our life as a community, our lives as families, that's what we have to do. We can't apportion the blame here because, as I say, this is something that is involved, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, actually, that we've all become involved in one way or another. The basic thing that we have to face is what is the way forward, and that's what's going to be addressed at this conference.
I guess you're right, because we've got to be 100% responsible for ourselves. And when we start going into that area of blaming, that's when sickness will just spiral out of control. And I guess taking responsibility could be going to this particular conference. What sort of people do you think should be attending this conference, Dr. Guy?
I'm everybody. Look, this is a big thing. It's huge. It has overwhelmed our health system. We're having a real crisis on our health system, and it's not really being dealt with. I mean, it's being politicized. Some political parties are saying we have too many nurses. Some political parties are saying we have too few. Some people are saying it's because it's a financial crisis. Actually, it's a crisis of sickness. There are more people falling sick than there were before the pandemic. And that's what has to be addressed.
And so you're kind of a bit of a household name, I guess, well, especially in our circles. But for those who don't know who you are, what are your credentials? What has your goal been over the last few years?
I used to work in the biotechnology industry. I worked for Genetic ID, which was a testing and certifying laboratory network around the world, global network that identified problems in the genetics of food. And so I'm closely aligned with the industry. I have a PhD in psychology and undergraduate degree in theoretical physics. But wow. Through my work, I've progressed and into a community and looked deeply into some of the issues here. And so I communicated with colleagues way back at the start of the pandemic. I was interested in the vaccine. The advice I got from people working in the field in gene therapy at top universities was don't go near this vaccine. And I didn't. And I've looked into the research surrounding this. and decided to write about it.
And so I guess, there's like, obviously I've witnessed here at the Brilin Functional Medicine Centre, huge amounts of damage. I've even had people come in, even medical professionals. In fact, I can remember one guy coming in who's like this, who's an absolute mess, and never correlated the vaccine with his condition. He said after his first shot, he was in bed for a week. After the second shot, he was in bed for 3 or 4 weeks. And after his third shot, he was a mess. And it's just does my head in. But I believe, of course, what we're also got a bit of a battle against is the authoritarianism information versus information that's coming from like yourselves and the medical and the other side of the medical industry. And it's really difficult for people to kind of navigate through what is truth and what is not. It's very difficult to know what is truth.
Yeah, and there's a lot of allegiance here. If you're in the medical profession, of course, you subscribe to vaccines, and you really, what the step that was not realized was that this was not a traditional vaccine. It did something completely different. Traditional vaccines stay outside the cell membrane. mRNA vaccines, DNA vaccines go inside the cell. They work entirely differently. So they get into that area which controls the entire physiology, and they disrupt it. The mRNA vaccines are based on bacterial models, which are essentially destructive. We all know bacteria are essentially destructive of the human physiology. So this is harnessing destructive technology and trying it out in the physiology. And it really, well, people should have known where they was going right from the start, because if you look back in the published literature before the pandemic, there were red flags around this technology, and we were rushed into it. And, it's hard to change gear. I mean, I have sympathy for the people in the medical profession because they're trained to do something, and they have, a perspective, which they all share, on what is the proper course of action here. And the word vaccine looms very large. In fact, I've got a friend who used to be my doctor when we lived in Sydney, and he had a stroke and was admitted to hospital. He nearly died, and his physician told him it's because of the vaccine. Well, he came out of hospital and said, no, it couldn't have been because of the vaccine, even though his doctor told him it was. And that's, it is difficult to change gear, and you have to have the right information. You have to have a public debate. You have to be able to look into any new field comes along, like this is new, a completely new field, biotechnology and biotech medicine. You have to be able to have conversations, and it takes a long time to sort out what kind of effects these things are going to have. The same with COVID. This is not a zoonotic disease as far as the consensus of opinion is. This was a constructed disease which is proved to be highly unstable. It mutates at a very high rate. It has fragments of DNA in it which are very mobile. It works differently in the physiology from most viruses. It seems to have the capacity to hide in the physiology for a very long time. And these are things that are new, and they're going to require examination and fresh thought in the field of health. And that has to be conducted on a scientific platform. It has to be conducted on a platform of results. We have to know what's going on. We have to know the data. That means we have to know the health outcomes of the population, their vaccination status, their age, the kind of diseases, the mortality rates. And then we have to take a measured decision about this. And that's an ongoing scientific process.
But
and
they must be
ROADSHOw is to air these issues.
That must be almost impossible for you because at the moment you don't have buy-in on the orthodox medical system here in New Zealand. You'd only be up against a brick wall, will you not?
Well, I mean, look, we've all been in situations where we have something to give, but we're dancing outside the fire circle. But you have to dance your way into the fire circle. That's what you have to do. And the ticket to get in there is knowledge, it's sensible analysis, and use of official data and so on. And that's what we're doing here at the Hatchard Report.
I really look forward to listening to your talks at the ROADSHOw. And yeah, my understanding, and you might be able to correct me because it's only what I heard, therefore it's not necessarily a fact, that in 2012 or 2014, they actually changed the definition of vaccine in order that they were able to call this particular vaccine a vaccine. Now, vaccine, I guess you could almost say, is a brand name. So when we think about vaccine, we think of something that protects, safe, something that increases our immunity. Do you think there is that's why perhaps so many even medical doctors that, without sounding arrogant, perhaps should have known a little bit better, fell for getting this vaccine?
I think it's the public relations. You know, there's been an enormous amount of public relations hype surrounding biotechnology, saying that people will live longer, they'll be more healthy, and that's very persuasive stuff. But it's not written by scientists; it's written by hidden persuaders, by PR people, and it just doesn't stand up to the science. It's actually very, very hard to find any success stories in the biotechnology field, but very, very easy to find stories of lab leaks all over the world, insecure laboratories. And it's very hard to make them secure. And it's very easy to find stories of adverse effects. This is something driven by a great deal of investment, a great deal of hype. But it doesn't stack up.
Just before we conclude, I looked at your website and I saw an article there, 188% increased risk of mortality amongst children between the ages of 12 and 19. Are you able to just spend a couple of minutes to explain that for us?
Absolutely. Well, it was very interesting because a person put in a OIA request, that's a Freedom of Information request to the government, wanting to compare the mortality outcomes after the COVID vaccine to after the flu vaccine by age from 2019 to the present. So it was a great deal of data, and it was released. But not a lot you can do with that because there's not a lot of data about flu. But there is an enormous amount of data about COVID vaccination. So I was able to, on government websites. So I was actually able to find out exactly how many teens had been vaccinated and people in their 20s and 30s and so on, each age bracket. And then look specifically at the 90-day outcomes of mortality. That means people dying within 90 days of having a vaccine. And what came out of that was that in that specific period of 90 days after a vaccine, that the death rate among teens was 188% of any period outside that 90 days. And for 20 to 30s, it was 85% more. So that's that dovetails with a lot of other data, by the way. The very, very, very high incidence, again from an OIA, incidence of chest pain in emergency departments of people under 40. There are, and you have to sort of glean this information by doing these OIA requests and then analyzing the data. because the government is not releasing this kind of data. They're sitting on it, and they never used to sit on it. It's very hard to get up-to-date information on heart attacks. It's very hard to get up-to-date information on strokes. All of these things which were regular, and on mental health, all of these things regularly published. A lot of it, they just stopped publishing it during the pandemic.
And they're also changing the information. Like, my understanding is that, for example, they used to record suicides, but now a lot of these suicides have been written off to accidental death, etc. So it is probably the data is a little bit not that accurate in the first place, maybe.
That's always a problem with data. I work with social data. I published, a lot of papers on social data on crime, for example. With social data, they're always changing the goalposts, changing the way that these pieces of information are collated and categorized and so on and so forth. So that's sort of bread and butter of this kind of research, is working out what is a consistent series of data. And that's something we're very careful to do here at the Hatchard Report, and any researcher, if they're worth their salt, and see their studies published, then they're going to have to be very careful about how these things are presented and gathered and so on and so forth. There are, once you look into it, if you're allowed access to this kind of data, you can generally start to work out how to make it consistent across a time period.
Our practitioner in Timaru, he's over 80 now. He's a mathematician, statistician, taught degree level chemistry, and he ended up getting hold of the Pfizer report, and he pulled it to bits. Like, courts have used him for expert data advice, and he pulled it to bits. And basically, we titled the video 600 deaths in the first 24 hours. That was the data he was able to extract from that Pfizer study. So, but that's not volunteered information on TV1 News, is it?
Yeah. Well, our media has let us down, hasn't it? I mean, the job of media is to, reflect what's going on in the nation, and they seem to be missing in action. And you're going to have to look overseas. That dam is starting to break. You've got mainstream papers like the Telegraph in the UK, the Daily Mail, BBC even now reporting vaccine injury openly and discussing it on their programs. Why aren't we doing it here? We've got to catch up. We can't, we can't live in the past on this. We've got to face up to what's happened and work out the way ahead.
Well, Dr. Guy, I'm so grateful that you've taken the time out to speak with me today. And if you are people out there, if you're thinking about this conference, if you think something's just not quite right, but you just can't quite put your finger on it, maybe this is the conference for you. The Safe and Effective Roadshow. Is there another side to the story? It's a quest for common sense, compassion, justice, and truth. And remember, it's a solution-based conference. It's a big conference. It's 8:30 in the morning till 5:30 at night, with some incredible speakers, including Dr. Guy Hatchard and several other doctors, analysts, even writers, and even quite a famous actor who's been severely injured. If you look on my past videos, I've interviewed him, Barry. So it's going to be a really wonderful day. But fundamentally, the day is to uplift for healing. Thank you very much, Dr. Guy. Now, just before I turn the record button off, is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion?
All right, just thank you for listening, and looking forward to seeing you.
Wonderful. Thank you.